On Church Bible, page 971. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. Treasures in heaven. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money.
Great. Well, if you want to have your Bibles open, they're on page 971. I used to work for a bank in the city, and then latterly for a church right in the heart of the City of London, right in the heart of one of the most materially prosperous places on earth. Ever more shiny towers. It feels like whenever I go into the centre of town, they've built another great big gleaming skyscraper. Monuments to the significance and the enduring success of the square mile. Absolutely mind-blowing sums of money and measures of wealth being bought and sold and traded and made. Bonuses in the millions, portfolios in the billions. The city is the engine of the British economy, and it seems to offer the dream for so many who come from all over the world to work there, including, of course, some who are here. And when I worked at that church in the city, we'd be occasionally called upon to help at a city funeral. And I remember one in particular. The deceased was a man who had only ever infrequently come to the church, but he'd been a very senior figure in one of the firms whose offices were right next door, and so there were some kind of personal connections. And he'd worked, presumably very hard, long hours in a very high-pressure environment, until finally he'd reached a point where he could retire. Now, he'd done very well for himself, so he'd been able to retire a little bit early, and he'd also been able to purchase for himself a house in Portugal, on the Algarve, on a complex with a golf course. Getting his tan up and his handicap down. That was to be his great retirement project. And then, less than a month after his retirement, he was found on the floor of his villa. Heart attack, probably. Gone. And I remember as he briefed us as a staff in preparation for the funeral, the rector of the church repeating something that his predecessor had apparently frequently said to him: we must never forget that it is all perishing. We must never forget that it is all perishing. The first half of Matthew chapter 6 has been Jesus speaking to challenge his disciples with the question, who are you living for? We've heard it repeatedly warn them not to seek to put on public displays of righteousness to win the approval of others, to live always hoping that other people are looking, but instead to live genuinely for God, knowing that he sees, that he will reward. Live for him, Jesus says. And then our passage this morning moves us on slightly as Jesus speaks to challenge his disciples with not so much who, But where and when are you living for? And there's two options really. Are you living for here and now? Or are you living for heaven and the future? So let's see how Jesus frames that challenge, shall we? By firstly seeing the problem with earthly treasure. That's what we find in verse 19, the problem with earthly treasure. Jesus says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. There's the problem with earthly treasure. It's very simple. It doesn't last. We know this, but we so easily forget it, don't we? Because it's right here, and it's right now. But I think the point that Jesus is making is pretty hard to argue with. And it's something that we know through repeated bitter experience. Stuff doesn't last. I mean, many of us will find that today. I don't think any of us would be kind of absolutely astonished if as we sat here in church we noticed a hole in the jumper that the threads had begun to pull loose. Or that when we got back in the car we found that one of the tyres was flat as a pancake. And then finally, after a lift home with the AA man, we get home to discover the patio door is ajar. And the TV, the laptop, the jewellery, it's all gone. Things just don't last. Where Jesus says thieves break in and steal, he more literally says actually, thieves dig through and steal. That makes sense, of course, when he was speaking in where most people's houses would have been made of mud, that sort of substance. In that sort of time, a sharp tool would have been as good as any key. Actually, sometimes thieves do still dig through and steal today. When I was growing up, there was a NatWest bank up at a little shopping area called the Moor Top, very similar to the shops just up the road here in Stanmore. And for a while, the building next door to NatWest was empty. And some blokes took the opportunity to get in there and tunnel underneath the ATM in the bank and make off with it, make off with all the cash that was in it. So you can even try and put your stuff in the most secure place possible, but it's never actually safe. There was a story in the news earlier this week about the fact that an increasing proportion of car thefts are of keyless cars, i.e. those with the newest technology, those with the kind of the most modern, most advanced security features. But the authorities believe that the thieves from the criminal gangs are getting jobs at the car companies so that they can learn how the systems work, so that they can then easily overcome them. The problem, isn't it? You can try as hard as you like to develop something new, something more advanced to keep things safe, but things in this world are never truly safe. They just don't last. Our society often works on the basis that somehow it's your money. It's the accumulation of material possessions which will provide you with some kind of security. But Jesus wants us to see that money, that houses, that stuff, that earthly treasure is by its very nature insecure, because your money is temporary. And even if nothing in this life separates it from you, you can't take it with you. We must never forget, it is all perishing. Now don't mishear me, the Bible doesn't say that money has no value, no temporary value. We thought about that in our midweek session this week, actually thinking about work. God calls on us to provide for ourselves. He that shall not work shall not eat. He calls on us to look after our families. We're called to rest, we're called to enjoy life. Jesus isn't saying that the things of this life are to be totally shunned. He's not saying you shouldn't have any money, you shouldn't have anything. But he is asking, but where is your treasure? We don't want to be like the man confronted by a robber at gunpoint. Your money or your life? The man says nothing. The robber gets a bit impatient. Come on, mate. I said your money or your life. The man says, hold on. I'm just thinking. Earthly treasure doesn't last. That's the problem. Which is in contrast to the beauty of heavenly treasure. Verse 20, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Now, I'm not an independent financial advisor, but what Jesus seems to describe here sounds like a pretty good investment, right? It's rock solid. Nothing can damage it. It won't decay. No one can steal it away. There's not even any inflation to gradually erode its value. The treasures of heaven will be every bit as real and as tangible and as tasty and enjoyable as the treasures of earth. Actual physical treasures. As well as the treasures of love and justice and wisdom and joy in a peace freed from the corrosion and the frustration of life in this world. So why would you live for here? Why would this world be our first love? Because again, verse 21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus says, if you want to know what you love, if you want to know what you're living for, look at where your treasure is. It's interesting, I think, here that it's your heart that follows your treasure. I think we sort of expect that to be the other way around. Where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. But Jesus says, no, your treasure gives away where your heart is. Because in some ways your treasure also guides your heart. And so if your treasure is here on earth, if what we spend our time working for and daydreaming about, if where we put our hope in is the stuff of this world, then our hearts will be led by that. Kind of tied to it. It's a challenging diagnostic, really. What we treasure, what we are, what and where we're living for is revealing of the state of our hearts. Might just be worth each of us spending a bit of time this week pondering that. Where is my focus? When I'm in need, what do I fix my hope upon? Where is my treasure? Because we tend to move towards that we fix our gaze upon. Like when you teach a kid to ride a bike. And if you'd have heard us trying to teach our kids to ride a bike, you'd have heard quite a lot of, look up, look forward, look where you're going. Because the tendency is always to look down. Look at the handlebars, look at the wheel, look at the pedalling. But then they'll wobble, they're all over the place. You've got to look where you're going. You've got to look forward. And it's like that here. Our lives will drift towards the place where our treasures are stored. No wonder that the Apostle Paul says in Colossians 3, set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. Which leads us naturally, really, into verses 22 and 23. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Here, really, we could take the sort of catchphrase we've used in Matthew 6 and just twist it a little bit and ask, what are you looking at, kid? I think initially these verses might strike us as a bit odd, because we kind of get all the treasure stuff, Jesus. So hold on, why are you talking about eyes all of a sudden? But we've already started, I hope, to see the connection. We will come to treasure that which we spend our time looking at, that which we spend our time focusing on. And so the health of our heart, the health of us on the inside, will be determined by what we let in, by what our eyes spend their time looking at. Because the eyes are like the lamp of the body, Jesus says. They are how the light gets in. So is what you're looking at healthy? Looking at heavenly things, looking to serve God, looking to love others, looking to be generous? Or are they unhealthy? Looking to earthly things, to serve ourselves, to be stingy, to store up for us? Let me just in case it's helpful, let me just give you two kind of personal examples on this, just to have a think about what this might mean. To hear Jesus on this. And I used to absolutely love reading the kind of bricks and mortar, the kind of property section that you get in the paper. I used to commute into the centre of town, and I'd get the Evening Standard. And for a couple of years, when I first moved to London, I used to read the property sections, try and work out what kind of property I might buy, where would be a good place to live. And then I realised that actually that was quite unhealthy in terms of what my eyes were looking at and the impact it was having on my heart. Quite unhealthy spiritually. Now, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the property bit in the paper, or with being careful and sensible about buying a house. But the fixation that I had on it was almost becoming a reflection of the fact that my faith was being put in earning enough to buy the right property, to live in the right place. That's where my treasure was. And so I stopped reading that section of the paper. Just flip past it, just go straight to the sport. Much easier. More recently, actually, I realised that without even really thinking about it, I'd subscribed to emails from about 8 or 9 different travel websites over the past couple of years. And I would, again, almost unthinkingly, would open every email that came, begin to kind of compile mentally the list of places I'd like to go, begin to daydream, begin to gradually just focus more and more of my time and attention on that. Now again, travel is a wonderful thing. Opportunities to deepen our understanding of the world, to connect with people, to grow in our appreciation and awe and worship of the God who created. But if it becomes our treasure, then our eyes are simply letting in darkness. Unsubscribe. I think the fact that it's the eyes that Jesus uses to make his point here is interesting, because it also reminds us that these things, that money, that the stuff of this earth, it isn't just an issue for people who have it. Because our eyes can govern our internal balance sheets just as much as our bank balance does. You can never have very much money and yet be totally blinded by money. The property section in the paper can be just as big a stumbling block as the property portfolio in real life. The items that we browse online, that we scroll through on our socials, can be just as easy to trip up over as the ones that we actually buy. Jesus is calling us in the Sermon on the Mount to be the light of the world. But if our lives don't reflect, don't embody kingdom values, if we are not full of light, but instead are full of darkness, well, we will not be able to live up to that calling. If we're not living for the kingdom, but purely for this world. Which leads us to Jesus' final stark challenge. You have to make a choice. God or money. That's what he says in verse 24. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now this verse is kind of annoying to us, isn't it? Really? I think it is, a lot of the time. Because, especially as people who are generally pretty comfortable, who live in a fairly wealthy part of the wealthiest city in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, we really want to have our cake and eat it. I do. We want to say, okay, Jesus, I really want my treasure in heaven, but I want my treasure on earth too. And yet Jesus says you can't do that. You can't have your cake and eat it, because you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money. When Jesus says master there, the image is that of slavery, not of kind of working as a freelancer. Then you can have lots of masters. But Jesus is describing a situation in which you're bound over. You are dedicated to give your life to the service of a master. And therefore you can only have one. Jesus talks in terms of love and hatred. Those are kind of simply, in one sense, strong ways of indicating the polarity, the need to make a choice. The option of holding two things together, Jesus says, is just not on the table. We cannot serve both God and money. And we may need to have some honest conversations with ourselves about the ways in which we are trying to do just that. For you, it may not be property, it may not be travel. You'll have to think about where the rubber hits the road for you on this. Rubber hits the road. Maybe it's cars. I don't know. But we mustn't let ourselves off the hook. Jesus loves us too much to let us off the hook. We mustn't let ourselves off the hook, but neither should we grind ourselves into the dust. This is not easy. I don't think it's necessarily easy for us to kind of diagnose our own hearts a lot of the time. And it's certainly not easy to put into practice, to live out. This is one of those kind of lifelong spiritual arm wrestles, I think, for most of us. It is a battle, it's a struggle. And to check our hearts, to check our treasures. But if we don't feel that, if we're not battling, and we don't want to, and we don't see why we should, well then maybe we should be particularly concerned. Because Jesus teaches us here that kingdom people will value kingdom things. They will value heavenly treasure above all the things of this world. And if our values don't reflect that, well then maybe we just need to ponder. We must never forget, it is all perishing. So what are we living for? Where are we living for? Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you once again for the words of the Lord Jesus. We thank you that Jesus is so clear. Please let our sinful hearts not dull that clarity. Please, where there are things that we need to do differently, in terms of how we think, in terms of what we look at, in terms of how we live, please help us to do those things so that we might serve you more wholeheartedly, so that we might not be storing up treasures that will not last, but that will perish, but so that we might be storing up treasures, so that we might be living for that which is truly secure, that which is eternal, that which is lasting and glorious beyond our imagining. Please let our treasure be in heaven, so that that might be where our hearts are also. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, as we close, we're going to sing the hymn Be Thou My Vision, which picks up on this idea and really is a kind of a song, a hymn that we sing almost as a prayer, that God would help us in all things, including with our money and our stuff, to live for him. So let's stand and sing together.